Audio Jungle.
Session we will be talking about the SQL Server, all the total overview of SQL Server and which other topics will be covered. Since it is a basic level of training, so won't be going in much deeper. We'll get the overview of the platform and how the services works, how the database is managed, what are precautionary measures and how to maintain the databases, and how to secure the servers and all. We'll discuss about all those things. So let's start with the training session. So in this training, we'll cover the platform overview of SQL Server. In this, we will talk about the basic platform of 2005 or 2008 R2. We won't be going to the 2012 or 2014 or 2016, as it covers more advanced features. For more advanced features, we'll be talking about in the next session. So in this session, we will talk about the managing databases, creating database plans, data protection, and logins, creating logins, securing, hardening the server and database objects, and most the practices which involve the high availability of the disaster recovery plans. So let's start with the platform overview. This relational database server goals, in which we have the reliability, availability, scalability, performance, data integrity, protection, reporting, and data analysis. So this all covers in the relational database, which is the SQL Server, the main objective of the SQL Server, which SQL Server presents to the user or the company for maintaining their databases and all the data integrity. So there is an architecture of SQL Server which consists of database engine, file storage engine, query engines, and databases, which is a logical collection of related objects like tables, store procedures, and columns and all. There is an instance also which is the services of the SQL Server. There are two types of instances: default instance and the name instance. So most of the organization or most of the application considered to be the default instance, or is there the reporting servers or the monitoring server which require the name instance as the basic necessity. So name instance serves as our own choice name, and the default instance considers the local host name. There are some of the services which are instance specific and the instance unaware services also, like SQL Server, SQL Agent, analysis server, reporting server, full text, and etc. are considered as an instance specific, which is also instance aware. If the instance is not there or the default instance is there, it goes to this instances and depends on this instance services. There are most of the instance unaware services, like in notification services, integration, browser, active, and writer. This instant unaware services means it won't require SQL Server availability to get means that if the instance is not at all created, then also the services will start. This is a main primary services required. There are some of the admin tools. The admin tools as in Windows Management Studio, through which it's a GUI based, through which we can manage the databases and other objects like creating queries, etc., etc. We can fetch the reports like table, growth of databases reports, and etc. Reports we can extract from the Management Studio. We can use the Windows 2000 Visual Studio IDE also to connect and write the queries for integration services. It can be connected to the integration services also through Visual Studio. And writing queries and etc. is a basic work of the GUI. We can also use the command-based tools to manage the databases, like backing up the databases and creating logins, etc. So there are other intelligence development tools like analysis, reporting, and integration services, as we spoke earlier. Some of the more additional admin tools for the DBA activities, profile request together for the performance tuning, when there is any performance bottleneck, we use the profiler to trace any blocking issues or etc. or anything else. Tuning advisor, which tunes the database engine. Configuration manager, there are the service start and stop protocols like on-in and off-in protocol, enabling the protocol for the means for browser services and all. So SAC is a service area configuration through which we can start or stop the SQL services. And other thing is this is a optional thing, the books online, which helps to get the more advice. Configuration of SQL Server. Before the SQL Server is configured, we have to notify some of the SLA points, that is service level agreement, which are provided by the company. So service level agreement includes how much the SQL memory will take, how much the disk space utilization, which server to include, which server versions to include, how many database users will be accessing this SQL Server, etc., etc. So mandatory or the key points we should say, which we have to capture, is the memory, processor, security. Means we have to use the Windows authentication or SQL authentication and auditing for the how many users have been logged in, how many users will be hitting the server, and the database setting, which is a default location like drives and all. So let's get to the managing databases. Like managing the databases, like how to manage the physical and the logical files. That is MDF and the LDF files or the NDF file for the additional database. There are the three types of storage files, physical database files. There is database which are primary data and the index tables. And the database files, that is MDF, LDF and NDF. This is a secondary database file. And the file groups. Logical connection files are the objects that are created in the file groups. So the primary database files, which contains the hard-coded data, data objects, and the transaction log files holds on the online OLTP transactions, which are non-volatile files, which can be edited. It is not the committed transaction files. So the transaction log files is a file which is called as a temporary also. So the committed files goes to the data file or the NDF files. So next, as I told, the installation discussion, which will be the determine the hardware, what are the hardware resources which are provided, and which I mentioned the SLA, the service level agreements. So and the which operating system to use, like Windows 2008, R2, 2003, which is now not available. So R2 or 12, which one to use, and the addition of the SQL Server. So SQL Server currently is 14. 14 is means production-wise recommended SQL Server edition. Also 2012, which is a highly stable edition for now. And the separate instance or the default instance, as we spoke, the instance which we have to, which the application prefers, like monitoring. It's so it some of the monitoring applications requires the name instance or some of the, like SharePoint requires the default instance. So default instance we can specify that, and the correlation value. So while talking about the database storage spaces, so we first have to specify what the database will be doing. It's how much performance it will be getting, how much the contention, how much the administration efforts will it require. On that we can specify the RAID levels and how the SAN storage will behave and all. So we can monitor and analyze it through the other third-party applications also. So this is the default layout of the storage files. Here we are, during the installation itself, we can specify where the database files will be dumping, like where the backup file will be there, where the TempDB will be configured, and etc. So this is the three types of RAID levels which we particularly consider for the SQL Server data files as well as the backup files. The monitoring list is one of the tools of the SQL Server Management Studio, which from which we can extract this kind of report for the disk usage, which is monthly. We can provide the report to the user, to the customers, if required, to the CSM and all. It gives a total graphical overview as well as the numerical overview of the how much the space is utilized and how much we can how much the index and unused allocated space are there. So there is these are some of the steps we can we can use in the daily. We can use in the daily activity purpose, like some of the time that is required to moving or the copying the database files to some this location to the another location, like backupping and the backupping and restore is one of the part of the means weekly part or the monthly part of the daily activity of DBA. So generating scripts of the objects, some of them the time the development tool, the development team needs some of the objects to be scripted out. All bulk inserting the rows in the maintenance window, we can do that, and etc. We can do during the moving and copying of the data. So there, we should also consider the maintenance plans and how the data is being protected from the backing or the restoring of the databases. So let's discover about some of the parts of the maintenance and the protection. There are three types of backups and the recovery models. So let's talk about the recovery models. It's a full, bulk, and the simple. Full recovery model considers the means all the transaction log backups and all the we can perform on them. Bulk log we can put it in the bulk log model if there is any bulk inserts operation performed on the database. So there is a minimum load on the transaction log files, or that which is the LDF files. And the simple where there is a there is a minimal of the no load on the transaction log. All the data has been dumped on the database files. So considering the recovery models, we can specify the backup operations also. For the full recovery model, we have to specify we have to we have to schedule the backup operations to likely the full differential and the transaction. All the three should be all the three should be implemented on the full recovery model. So because of full in the full recovery model, the transaction log files gets full. So we have to purge the transaction log files, and there is one of the key method to back up the transaction log files through which we can purge the transaction log files. And the differential backup logs the backup files since the last full backup, and the full backup is a total database file backup. And the transaction log also requires in the point-in-time recovery. These are some of the recovery processes. Recovery processes like the latest full backup, latest differential backup, which takes the data from the since last full backup, and the transaction log backup, which has all the transaction details. So if there is any broken transaction log file, we can't restore on the point-in-time. And the differential file backup, we can restore to the last differential backups itself. So there is a key point where there should be restored with the no recovery option for all the transaction log backups. And lastly, if there is no any other transaction log to be restored, we can set the recovery set the recovery option, and the database makes it in the usable mode. Now these are some of the maintenance plans, like the maintenance tasks, miscellaneous tasks, and the backup tasks. The maintenance task considers as the database integrity, shrinking our database, which is not highly recommended, but some of the teams and the organization consider shrinking the database. And rebuild and reorganize, which are part of the development team advices where we can rebuild or reorganize. And the update statistics. After rebuilding or reorganizing, we have to update the statistics, or the fragmentation in the pages of the SQL database file. So miscellaneous task considers the SQL Server agent job and the cleaning of the maintenance files, reports files, and etc. And the backup databases task. These are the tasks which we can schedule on the scheduled time, on the scheduled time in the specified in the job. Like full backup, we can schedule it to the weekly or differential or the daily or hourly, or any how much the OLTP transactions are there on this on the database. And transaction log backup, like hourly or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, or as mentioned in the SLA, which are the business requirements. The scheduling the maintenance tasks will be databases like the specific databases or wizard options, managing the logging and the history operations, manage and plan scheduling and all. These are some of the ability options. Ability is like HA and DR options. Like database mirroring can be provided as a HA as well as a DR with this two geography located the sites. We can database mirror the database. Log shipping, it ships the logs to the other different site location. Cluster, which is highly availability option, and the highly costed option also fellow clusters. And that application is another part like the mirroring itself. The part of the sequencer like the hardening of the SQL Server. Hardening basically starts from the Windows level itself. We can harden the SQL Server as well as in the individual manner. There are the layered security as I told the Windows level and the SQL level and the database level. Database level mainly is because of the user access and all. So if there are many user accessible database schemas, or we should harden the database access level, as some of the users don't need the permission to execute any queries or anything, or access the tables, etc. So secureable and the permissions. Securables are the thing which are secured, and the permissions are the scope and the inheritance. So these are the principle and the securables. Principle of the Windows level, SQL level, and the database level. There are some of the roles specified in each level. The securables are the windows for around the SQL Server login endpoint of the database rules, and etc. Which can say we can define the schemas and all. These are some of the best practices of the hardening. The part of the standard process, it should be mentioned the SL and the agreements also. So enable the required service and the features and security settings, uses about the importance of the security. And there are some of the key points which should be followed. These are service accounts. There should be a single service account for the SQL Server, which is same rights as the SA account, and SA should be disabled. This is the main best practice. And there should be a similar account which has the identical permission as the SA and should be hidden from all the users. So permission of the users, no network authentication, and network service account, and the domain service account. The SAC configuration allows the remote authentication, remote connections. There is a access permission level for the reporting service SSIS. We can specify the different service accounts for reporting services as well as the integration services. There are the remote queries and the CLI integration, the database mating options we can enable disable from here, and the command shell objects. Here we have two types of login. We have discussed about the Windows login as well as the SQL login. Windows login is most of the said to be a highly authenticated and the secured login which are managed by the AD Active Directory logins. As a SQL login, we can create the SQL logins in the SQL Server itself. But we have to specify how much that particular login should have access levels. Like we must check the check policy or the check expiration. So same policies we can push by the AD also in the Windows login itself. So there is one layer of the specific authentication, and the secured layer comes between from the Windows login. So Windows login is highly preferred than the SQL Server logins. This is how to create add the logins to the SQL Server and Windows login as well as SQL login. The authentication point, auditing, and the managing logins. We can manage through the Windows Studio itself. ID, database users and rules. We can specify the rules and the users and the application rules from the applications itself. Creating a role, creating user, working with the users and roles from the ID itself, or else a command line utility like sp add or sp grant db access. These are some of the rules and the database rules. Server rules which specifies the admin services and the admin account levels, permissions to the user. Other database rules with how to access the database, which user to deny the access, which user is the owner of which is the security admin. There are some of the secret options to encrypt the database. There's an encryption key specified. We have to back up that encryption key in the periodic time. SQL Server agent proxies should be specified, and the preventing the injections of the attack. This should be maintained from the SQL Server application point of view. SQL Server maintenance, there is a real world monitoring available, like there are third-party tools and etc. which are available to monitor the SQL Server. And we have the native tools also to monitor the SQL Server health, performance and all. There are automation of the database services, how to automate the generate the script, like to routine checkup and all. These are some of the regular tasks we should be scheduled in the SQL Server, like monitor the disk space, monitor the application, monitor the logical and the physical disk, how much it is growing, are they are not outgrowing or not, indexes, backup and recovery options. These are some of the points. There are more to it which we have to maintain and on the regular basis. There are management features like jobs, alerts, operators, server logins, mails, link servers. So that's it for this. That's it for this training part.